This is Gemara Metziah Daf Nun Aleph, and we're holding on the bottom of Nun Amid Beis, 4 lines from the bottom, as we continue to try to get out these shiurim in advance of Pesach, for those who like to not only prepare for Pesach for the Yontif, but perhaps to learn prior, so that on Yontif we can utilize it for Chazara, other limudim, etc. So 4 lines from the bottom. Says the Gemara, Ad Mosai Mutter Lahachsir. Until when is one allowed to back out? Said the Mishnah, till the amount of time that he could show it to a tagar or to a relative. Says the Gemara, Amar Rav Nachman, Lo Yishanu, we only learned El Lekeach. The buyer, that's how long he could back out. Aval Meicher, and this is really a byproduct off of yesterday's daf. Aval Meicher, but the seller, La'ilam Chayzer, can always back out. Says the Gemara, name of Metziah. Let's bring a raya to Rav Nachman. Chazru l'divrei chachamim. We said at the end of the Mishnah, after Rav Tarfon suggested that they could Aina until a third, and the Tagrim originally were Sameach. Subsequently, when they heard that it included an allowance to back out Kol Hayoim, then they were Chazru l'divrei chacham. So says the Gemara, if the seller can always back out, as we turn over to Nun Aleph Amid Aleph, Mishamachi Chazru, then it makes sense that the workers subsequently reverted back to the psak of the Chachamim away from Rav Tarfon. Rashi comes along, Rashi fills in the middle, the missing blank, says Rashi, Shemaya Moichrim Veina Nehenin. Why? Because if they were to sell it and they weren't benefiting Bar Chava Zaman, it's the same thing. Eli Amrit, if you're going to tell me on the top line of an Aleph Amid Aleph, Meicher Nami, if the Meicher has the same amount of liberty to back out, like the Lekeach, what difference does it make to these sellers? Why were they upset? Rav Tarfon gave Kol Hayoim. It's a two-way street, says the Gemara. So why would the Tagri Lord have said, forget Rav Tarfon, we'll stick with the Chachamim? What do you mean? The Meichrim, the sellers, are gaining as well. Answers the Gemara, Tagri Lord, Lo Yishchiach D'Ta'u. It was uncommon for them to err, and therefore, even though it's true that they would have more time for themselves, but the fact that the buyer would have more time was enough of a reason that they didn't like the arrangement, and that is the reason why we have no raya to Rav Nachman. But Rav Nachman sticks to his own, that the seller La'ilam Chayzer. And the Gemara continues with the story, 3 lines from the medium-sized lines, and an Aleph Amid Aleph. Oshpazimnei, the Rami Bar Chama Zaven Chamra of Atah sold wine and made a mistake. Ashkechei Davi Atzif. So Rami came and found that the seller was upset. Amar Lei, and he asked him, Amaya Tzifta, why are you upset? Amar Lei, Zvini Chamri V'to. I sold wine and I made a mistake. Amar Lei, said Rami Bar Chama, Zilahadr B'cha, so go back out. Amar Lei, so the seller said, Hashali Yosef She'er L'Tager L'Kroivai, but it's been longer than the amount of time to show it to my relatives or to show it to a merchant. So the seller thought that he lost his ability to back out. Shadra L'Kamed Rav Nachman. So Rami sent a person to Rav Nachman, Amar Lei, Lo Yishanu El Lekeach. This time period, until you could show it to someone else, until you could show it to a relative, is only for the purchaser. Aval Meicher La'ilam Chayzer. The Meicher can always back out. Says the Gemara, my time, what is the reason? Loikeach Michai Biyadai. The one that bought it has the item in his hand, therefore wherever he goes, he could show it and he could find out if the deal was a good one, Vamrilei. And they'll tell him, whereas Meicher, the seller, he doesn't have the item in his hands. He has to wait for a similar sale like that one, and then only then v'yada ita ilaita. Then he'll know if he made a mistake or not, and therefore the seller has much longer to back out. The story corroborating the shita of Rav Nachman. Continues the Gemara, another story. Ugavra, there was a person Davinoket Varshachi Lizvune, that this person had silk ribbons to sell. Karishita, he called out that he wanted shita 6. Vashavya Chamsha, but really they were only worth 5. We're on the 6 medium-sized line. V'yaviyavle Chamsha Upalga, and if someone would have paid him 5.5, Havi Shakel, he would have taken it. Also, Gavar, a certain guy came, and the person said, if I give him 5.5, Havi Mechila will be Mechila. Why? Because it's less than Oina, and therefore, there's nothing that I can do subsequently. If I pay 5.5, the sale will be binding. Ete and Le Shita, I'll give him 6, Vatboy Ladina, and I'll bring him to Bezdin, and thereby I'll get back everything. And then I'll get the item for 5. Also, like I made the Rav Amar Le Lo Shano Lokech Min Atagar. Avlokech Mi Balabayis Ein Lo Lava No. An important rule: only if I'm a merchant, but when purchasing from a Balabayis, there's no dinim of Aina. Says the Gemara, why is there such a chalik? Hogaver Davinokin keep it lizvune. A person had earrings to sell. Karishit and Vishavya Chamshin. He called out 60, but it was worth 50. If you have a Chamshin, if you would have given Chamshin Chamish, 55, Avishakli would have taken it also Gavra. V'amar, if you know that Chamshin, I pay 55, Avimachila. At the late sheet dog, pay him 60. That's be a Ladina. And I'll bring him to court. Let's come there of Chizda. Amar Le Lo Shanu Alav Lekech Min Atagar. Avlo Bekech Belavayis Ein Lo Lava No. Amli Rav Dimi Yashir, correct. Chimer Rav Elazar Yashir, correct. I asked the Gemara Vanan Tanan, but we learned Kashem Shanol Hedi Kachanol Tagar. My Hedi does not mean Lavalabayis. Amar Rav Chista B'Titzar Darte. Says Rav Chista, referring to a certain item, a certain rough type of garment, Aval Mani Tashmishtei, but regular items that one uses, the Ikari Ale, which are chashiv to him, Loi Mazbin Lehu Vilav Yiseri. That's the reason that we now understand why there's no ona by a balabayis. Because if a balabayis is selling a personal item, there's always that personal attachment to the item, and therefore for him to part with his item, he will upcharge the price, and that's the reason why there's not going to be Aina in such a case. We continue with the Mishnah, smack in middle of Nun Aleph, Amud Aleph. Says the Mishnah, the purchaser, the seller has the dinam of Aina. Rav Yehuda Omer Ein Aina l'tager, Mishuda alav Yadal Yaina. Rata Omer l'tenli ma'isa, if you want to give me back my money, Otenli Masha Nisani, or give me the amount that I was defrauded. And as one could anticipate, this Mishnah is really a direct continuation of the previous sugya, almost not Mishnah worthy, meaning it's literally just continuing the conversation. But we begin with a makar. Says the Gemara Minani Mili, from where do we know this day in the Tanur Abanan? Says in the Apostle, you sell something to your nation. Al Toinu. Do not defraud, do not overcharge him. That's where we see where the buyer gets ripped off. Says the Gemara, the Torah had to write both. If the pasuk only spoke about the seller, then what would I have thought? The reason why is because he knows his purchase. Maybe there is no issue with maybe there's no such thing as overcharging. He's a mere purchaser. He doesn't know what the item's worth. So I paid him what he was asking. I underpaid. Why is that my problem? So I would think maybe there's no din of Aina. Because Rachmana Lokeh Misham Dekakani made a kidney and Damri Inchi Zavante Kanis. Because people say that the sale is a kinyan, avol meicher davudi kamayvid damri inshi, zayvin ayvid, that when you're selling, you're losing, so I know it's therefore we need, the Torah needed to write both cases. So again, zamte kanis, of course, is an interesting lashon, because what does it mean? What you bought, you acquired. Of course, you acquired what you bought because you bought it. So Rashi over here comes along, and Rashi says what it means is that if you want to keep your money, buy something with it. So money will be lost, but the item will not. So we see at some level there was a kinyan in any event, or regardless of the price, and maybe therefore the lokeach has that benefit. So maybe that's why there would be no ainah to the lokeach. Rav Yehuda Imer says, Rav Yehuda ein ainah letager. There's no ainah for a merchant. Says the Gemara, what in the world does that mean? Misham shehu tager, because he's a merchant, ein lo yalema. No, Rav Nachman Arav v'tager safsar. Shanu, we're talking about a middleman. My taima. What's the reason why there would be no ainah according to Rav Yehuda? Made the others vinte kama shavya, because he knows how much the item is worth. And if he undersold the item, then that means he was being meichel. Why would he do it? Why would he just stop take a loss? Misham, must be another sales coming his way. Another sales coming his way, and therefore he needs the cash right now. And only now, afterwards, does he want to back out? Meaning, it's not that he didn't know; he was fully aware, but he needed the cash, and only afterwards does he want to renege. And that's why he says Rav Yehuda, there's no enough for the tagar. Rav Ashi Amar Segib Shamaya in the tagar ana in betayras aina. What it means is there's no dinim of aina. Shavilu bachas bechdei aina. Chayzer even less than the amount of aina. It reverts back. Tanya Kavase, the Rav Nachman says the Gemara, Araya to Rav Nachman, Rav Yehuda Imer tagar in lam ana. Why? Mimnei shehu baki. Because the tagar is a baki, he's an expert in all the items, and therefore if he sold it for such and such price, he was fully cognizant of what was going on, and he clearly didn't care. Continue the Mishnah. The one who was hutal alav, imposed upon, he has the upper hand. Says the Gemara, Mani Masnisa. Who is the Tana of our Mishnah? Says the Gemara, Rav Nasan, Rav Yehuda Anasi. Why? Rav Nasan, if it was Rav Nasan, Masnisa Kodani Ratza. Or Braisa like Kodani Ratza. Rav Yehuda Anasi, Masnisa going to look at Braisa Kodani Meicher. So what's going on over here? So says the Gemara, numerous ways introduced with the Simmons Zayin Beis Reish Shin for Terutzim, how to reconcile the Mishnah with the Braisa. This is a Braisa from yesterday. The Rav Nosson ruled that up to a shtos, the sale is valid, but you have to pay back. Yet the Mishnah by us gives a choice. So says the Gemara, Amar Rav Elazar Nazu Ini Yodea Mishana. I don't know who taught our Mishnah. Rabba Amar, meaning our Mishnah is not proper and rather the Braisa is correct. Rabba Rav Nasani Yitzan Nami Braisa Ratza. Switch the wording in the Braisa. Rabba Rav Yehuda Nasi Umay Deshayv Mastisik Mafarish Braisa. The Braisa is merely the next step after the Mishnah. Amar Ravashi dekinam dektoniach lokech v'chamoich mafarish lokech shma mina shiri shayar el moicher shma mina. So we see clearly that the case of the moicher was left out, not because there's a chilek, but rather Braisa just picking up and explaining that which the Mishnah did not. Says the Gemara, Itmar. Now we're going to discuss a unique case which probably not only is relevant, but misvara is something that everyone probably wondered or wonders. Once they'll hear it, you'll realize the question quite obviously. Itmar. What happens? You're making a sale. You tell the guy, listen, this is the price. I don't want to have any issues afterwards. No backsies. No return policy. What? There's no enough. This is the way it is. Says the Gemara, there's a machlekes, and now the Gemara pins that machlekes. Rav Damar Karameir Shmuel Damar Karav Yehuda. So says the Gemara, it's a machlekes Rav and Shmuel whether you can make such a stipulation. And now the Gemara says that this machlekes Rav and Shmuel is machlekes Rameir and Rav Yehuda. The Tanya, 3 lines from the bottom. Gemara in Kedusha that we learned, someone gets married on the condition that they're not really having the marital relations aspect. There's no she'er referring to food. There's no ksos referring to the husband doesn't have to clothe his wife. There's no aina. There's no obligation of the husband to have marital intimacy with his wife. What's the halacha? Reizim ukdashes to tonight batal divi Rameir. Rameir holds they're married, and the Tanai is batal, a full-fledged marriage. Rav Yehuda Omer, but davar shem mamayin Tanai kayim. But davar shem mamayin monetarily it works. So says the Gemara, it suggests the Gemara, I should say, that Shmuel that said that there's no ona because you made that stipulation. It's going like Rav Yehuda that says regarding monetary things, you can stipulate what you want. Whereas Rav that said even after such a stipulation there is ona, is like Rameir, that even though you clearly try to stipulate that there's no sher ksus v'aina, what did Rameir hold? Rameir held there is a full-fledged marriage and there's nothing you can do about it. Answers the Gemara that no, the 2 machlekesim are not tali zebazeh in the last line of Nan Aleph Amar Aleph Amr Rav and Adamri I feel Rav Yehuda. I could hold even like Rav Yehuda. Ad kan lekom Rav Yehuda hasamel diyada kamachla. Over there in the case of Rav Yehuda, what was happening? When did Rav Yehuda say b'davar shemam tonight kayom, in which both parties knew what was going on? There was a clear stipulation, and then there was a mechila of clarity, meaning they said that they knew what was going on and they still wanted to go through with the marriage. But in our cases, we turn over to nun beis amid beis. In our case, miyada demachal. Does he know to be Michael? Meaning, even though they made it tonight, I don't want there to be Aina. Says the Tabrashi, he didn't know there was Aina. Sover, he thought, okay, the guy's making stipulation that there's no backseas, there's no, sounds like a fair deal to me. Only later did he realize maybe that's why that case is different. Ushmul Amar in the tablan of the Nalaf Beis. Anad Amri Afilu Rameir, who said in the case of Kedusha, it's full-fledged marriage, I can look over Rameir Hasam. Why? Because over there certainly is going to be an uproodal of the stipulation. Why? Because it's a chiyuv, like Rashi says. It's a chiyuv for the marital intimacy and the share and the ksos. In our case, maybe there will be no brutal of the Tanai. Why? Because maybe Lamaisa there's no ana. So says the Gemara, this machlekes Rav and Shmuel is not dependent upon the machlekes Rameir and Rabbi Yehuda. Amar Ravanan, 4 lines down, even firstly Demar Shmuel. To me, it was explained the shita of Shmuel. Again, the shita of Shmuel that said that if one stipulates there's no ana Lamaisa, there is no oina. Ha'imar lechavero. Someone says to his friend, "Amanash ein lecha alay oina, ein lo lavana. Amanash ein bay oina." But if someone says that there is not in it oina, then ari yesh bay oina. So let's look at Rashi to explain what's going on over here. If he says ein lo lavana, then it could work because who says there's oina? Whereas if he says she'ein bay oina, if he says in this lashon. It's not that he's forgiving it, but rather he's saying, I'm making this deal on condition there's no na. And guess what? There was aina. And therefore it's a mekach tayis. And that's the reason why if you want to back out, you can back out. That's what Shmuel meant. Ein layalav ana. Ask the Gemara Mason. Now, this is an interesting question because we're in the middle of a machlekes Rav and Shmuel. So usually the Gemara will utilize this as a moment to ask on either Rav or on Shmuel. But here, this Meisvei is asking on the Gemara's teretz that Rav and Shmuel could agree with Rav Meir and Rav Yehuda. Most notably, that Rav could fit with Rav Yehuda. Meisvei asked the Gemara, proving that Rav cannot fit with Rav Yehuda. Says the Braisa, someone does deal be'emana on trust. He trusts the shliach is going to get him the best price. Or someone says to his friend, L'Rav Damar, Anad Amri, Afilu Rav Yehuda, Hamani. Who is going to be the Tana of this Brisa? Rav, we said, could fit with all the Rameh and Rav Yehuda, that everyone will agree that if you made a clear Tanai to waive, to be Meichel the Aina, it will not work, and you cannot prevent the Aina. Yet in this Brisa, what do we see? We see when he said, She'ein l'cha Aina, then it's clearly going to work. So who is it going to fit with? Amar Abaya Machvarta Rav Amar Kirameir Shmod Amar Krav Yehuda. Teretz number 1 says Abaye, like we originally thought, yes, the Machlekes Rav and Shmuel is indeed the Machlekes Rameir and Rav Yehuda. Rav Amar, that's the teretz of Abaye, which again is sort of rolling the clock back and saying that yes, our Machlekes is that Machlekes. Rav Amar says Rava loikasha kam bistan, kam b'mefarish. Depends on the level of stipulation. The Tanya, 15 lines down, the first one line is the Tanya. Says the Braisa, Bamedvar Mamurim Bistam. When is that which we said is if you didn't explicate, you didn't say explicitly what the story is. Al Mefaresh, but if you said it explicitly, I know. I know it's only worth 100. And he says explicitly, I don't want there to be no. It's a clear, good deal. The buyer says, this item that I'm buying for $100, I know. So says the Gemara, the teretz of Rava is, if someone knows that there is a deal, that it is overcharging, and they say and they speak it out, that's going to be the case, b'mefaresh, that their Tanai will work. And we conclude, Tanu Rabbanan, one last brisa, Hanoisev and Hanoisev Amana. Someone doing business on trust, Harizeh lo yachshav esarab, Harizeh lo yachshav esarab emana v'seyav b'shafa. He cannot consider the merchandise which is inferior that he gave to the shliach, and the better stuff that's given to him on par. You can't have it halfway. And he has to pay him either, and if he's giving to him b'amana, he has to give the shliach the schar katov, which is the porter's fee, the merchandise, how to transport it. Schar gamol, to pay the driver. Schar pondik, to pay for an inn, lodging expenses. Schar atzvay yotel. However, the shliach does not take wages for himself. Shekvar nasan loi scharoi mishalim. Why? Because you already give him the complete fees. Schar mishalim echel. What do you mean? Talking about a case where they give the shliach 4 garments per 100, meaning for the amount that you sell, you're going to get a percentage. Therefore, I don't have to give you anything more. Before we call it a day, let's just look at one Rashi. Rashi, about 10 lines from the white line, speaks about this case. You should be a chashiv is a rabbaman of a b'shaveh. Liasloyam tonas mois a yafe b'schar tircha kigoin. You have 2 wines. Yafe. There's good wines that people want to purchase. And the inferior that can only be sold in the store. You're not allowed to tell the shliach, you can't tell him, you have to handle the good stuff so that you carry the liability of the bad stuff. Then you'll get both of their monies. You can't do that because then you're lending him and you're paying him back more, and it's going to be a form of ribis. Rather, like people give amana shchar kotzev lehem, or zeh b'shavyav, and it has to be a fair deal. We'll pick it up from the Mishnah, b'siyata dishmaya.